Today on episode 106 of Rail Talk, we talk about Baeza getting his moment in the sun in the Pennsylvania Derby, ask Lisa Lazarus about the HISA budget, and unfortunately, talk a little bit more about the New York stewards and their ways, their innovative ways that they keep coming up with to screw the bettor. I'm Joe Bianca, ownership advisor, West Point Thoroughbreds.
Jonathan Green, general manager of DJ Stable. Joe, I love the sign. It reminds me of The Simpsons with 0 days since we've had a nuclear accident. Very well played. And Joe, the people have spoken, not only on a small level where they brought Jimmy Kimmel back after Disney was going to lose $7 billion of potential annual revenue, but we asked our audience to send us questions for Lisa Lazarus, and they responded in spades. So much so that we have to just focus today on just the financial questions. That's how many questions and comments we got for Lisa.
Let's do it. The opinions expressed on Rail Talk are those of hosts Joe Bianca and Jon Green and do not reflect those of anybody we work with or work for. Rail Talk is sponsored by Epic Insurance Brokers, one of the nation's top retail insurance brokers, providing expertise across key lines of insurance like property and casualty, employee benefits, unique specialty insurance. Our buddy, our brother, Chris Moore, leads Epic's equine specialty practice. You see him all over the place, the sales races. John was just texting, just saying that Chris was texting him while we were on the air about all the, you see, he's putting up the evidence right now to the screen of the text.
And look at the timestamp. Yeah. It's when I was doing my impression of Mattress Mack.
Doesn't he know we got more important things like impressions? But no, seriously, like Chris is on it. He is on top of it. And, John and DJ Stable have a lot of horses, moving back and forth from the sales and buying. And Chris is like, he'll be there for you. He'll anticipate your needs. And the Epic team will be as good as it gets in terms of unifying your insurance potential mess that you have. They're the number one in the business. Chris guarantees, like the Green Group, he'll bring you value. Give him a call, shoot him a text. It's 317-650-4519. Do it soon. If you buy yearlings and your insurance policy doesn't renew between July 1st and October 31st, you're leaving money on the table. Chris will get all that sorted for you. And like I said, he'll anticipate your needs. He'll watch the sales. He'll know, which horses are coming, which horses are going, and he'll be sure to get them all insured at the best possible number. That brings us to this week's
Epic Performance of the Week.
This week's Epic Performance of the Week is a mother-son duo. We're going to split the baby and give the Epic Performance of the Week to Baeza, first of all, for winning the Pennsylvania Derby, but also his mommy, Puka, who is just, I don't know, I can't think of a more productive broodmare maybe in my entire lifetime, certainly in the last 10, 15 years or so. Obviously, she's, she already was established just, with good magic and door knock as one of the best blue hen broodmares of the 21st century. But now to add another grade 1 winner in Baeza and John for the low price of $10 million, you could have her at Fasig November. I mean, we went back and forth about whether or not it was smart for Jon Stewart to sell her, but man, she's going to command a pretty penny.
Well, and it goes to show you just how royal her bloodlines are. That now she's doing it with different stallion lines as well. It was Good Magic, and now it's McKinsey. I mean, she is as versatile as she is valuable.
Yeah, and what's crazy is like her pedigree itself isn't that great. Like, she's by Big Brown,
right,
who was not a super stallion, obviously a nice racehorse, out of a Silver Ghost mare. Like, obviously you got Mr. Prospector on the dam side, and Summer Squall and some nice horses, but just the immediate pedigree of her isn't that special. But man, is she special in the breeding shed. So we're so stoked, trademark, to bring this next guest back to the Rail Talk studio, a friend of the show, returning champion, HISA CEO Lisa Lazarus. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being on the show once again. You guys are doing such a terrific job.
Thank you. Yeah, we're always happy to have you, and we always get something from it, and I think the horse people of this country get something from it too. Today, we're going to focus somewhat narrowly on the budget, the proposed budget for HISA for 2026. As kind of comes about, we discussed it last week on the show that a bunch of horsemen's groups wrote a letter, kind of objecting to the $78 million proposed budget. And so I'll just start with this. I talked to Mike Rapoli, yelled at me about this on the 100th episode about a month ago. And, we kind of got into it. And he was like, yeah, I think that HISA serves a purpose, but why can't we do it for 30 million or 40 million instead of 80 million? And my answer to him was, I don't know. I'm not privy to those things. You are, Lisa. Tell us why we can't do it for less than 80 million.
Sure. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start a little bit of a step back just to understand and set the table so that everyone understands kind of the framework and the world that we have to operate in from a financial standpoint. So the first thing is, obviously, under the Act, Congress has ordered us to do certain things and deliver certain things. And there are some things that are they're non-negotiable, and they were the price, frankly, for saving horse racing and preventing Congress from shutting down horse racing. And we've got to essentially collect the resources to deliver those things. We have to submit our budget to the Federal Trade Commission for approval pretty far in advance of the fiscal year. And so what we do is we really look at it as asking for a credit line. Like, what's the maximum amount of money we're going to need to operate under HISA, because we're not allowed to go back to the Federal Trade Commission in the middle of the year, right? And as you can probably imagine, when we're making these kind of assumptions, there's a lot of things we don't know. We don't know which racetracks and commissions are going to necessarily cooperate with us, or we have a lot of financial efficiencies. So we don't know what kind of credits we're looking at necessarily. We can get a lot better now that we're a few years in at making those assumptions. We still don't know for sure. We also have no idea how many anti-doping positives are going to be. So what that litigation world looks like. We don't know how many lawsuits are going to be filed against us. There are just many, many unknowns. Okay, so what we do is we calculate from a worst case scenario standpoint. Okay, so we look at it as, if nothing goes our way, if there are no efficiencies, and we're not able to essentially, costs go up and things happen that we're not expecting, what's the likelihood that we're going to have to spend, X? And so that's the number that we go to the Federal Trade Commission with. But significantly, in every year since HISA has been in effect, we've come in meaningfully under budget for the year. And so what happens with that money when we come in under budget is it goes towards the following year and offsets whatever costs are essentially allocated to the racetracks and horsemen for that fiscal year. So it just rolls over. We're not for profit. We don't keep any profits, distributed dividends. Everything simply goes back into the system. We have a methodology, it's important to understand, that decides. So basically, the only funding mechanism that the law gave us was to have our budget paid for by commissions first, but the commissions are not required to. They can decline. If they decline, then the obligation goes to racetracks and horsemen. And they, for the most part, split it 50-50. Okay, that's the only mechanism that we were given to launch. That's what we had to deal with. And so the HISA board came up with a formula that essentially says that they look at 50% the number of starts and 50% purses paid to essentially establish how much that particular state or racetrack has to pay towards HISA. So obviously, racetracks with more starts are going to pay more. Racetracks with higher purses are going to pay more. And that's essentially, how it all works. So why can't we do it for less is really your question. The truth is that we're always trying to figure out ways that we can use technology, AI, et cetera, to minimize costs and to find further efficiencies. And when we do, we cut costs. But ultimately, what we strongly believe, because we take this very seriously, we put a lot of time on it, is that what we ultimately spend, which is very different than the budget. What we spend and what we budget is very different. Like last year, for example, our budget was about 80, and we spent, I think it was 48. So once the credits are in play. So, there's a lot of, I think, kind of misunderstanding around how that all operates. But what we do is we sit down every year and we say, what is the most cost-effective way that we can deliver what we need to deliver? I will say, though, that, we're about 20% more than what the commissions were spending on the aggregate. People don't realize that we're overseeing 42 racetracks. And so we're taking basically the role or the job of what all of those commissions did, 20 commissions or so. So it's, when you look at it in that context, I don't think we have a particularly large staff. I can promise you that all of my staff are working extremely long hours. Nobody works 9 to 5. So we really try to maximize, obviously, productivity and work ethic. And we only hire people that not just have thick skin, but also are willing to work hard. And a lot of it is about, you have the people who have been in horses their whole lives and they care so passionately about the cause. They're willing to work all the time, like the Mark Guilfoyles and the Jen Dornbergers and the Ann McGoverns. They may otherwise think about retiring, but they want to leave horse racing in a place that is better than currently. And so that's why I have people who are willing to work such extreme hours and put so much thought into this. But really, at the end of the day, we don't think there is room for less spending than what we actually end up with at the end of the year, because we're not just keeping the lights on, we're delivering a program that gives back to the industry. And if we don't do that, there's no point in HISA. So what I always tell people is, I'm going to work as hard as possible to make the budget as efficient and as fair and as balanced as possible, but I'm also not going to run a substandard organization. This job is not for me if I'm just keeping the lights on. I am trying to move racing forward in the most cost-effective way possible. And sometimes that means essentially forcing certain groups to pay for enhancements they wouldn't do voluntarily without HISA, but that we believe are really critical and will actually sort of pay dividends down the road.
So,
one quick follow-up. Sorry, John. You mentioned the $80 million budget last year. You actually spent $48 million. This is probably a stupid question, but the other 32, does that get rolled over into the next budget? When do horsemen get charged? How does that get allocated, the difference between the budget and the actual spending?
It's actually not a stupid question at all. So what we do is we charge, so let's assume that there's about, I'm going to say 6 or 7 commissions, more or less, that ultimately take the responsibility of paying in their state. And they typically do that because the commissions have more tools in the toolbox through which to ultimately pay. So they can pay through, it's possible they can get legislation that will have some sort of grant to the racing, especially the racing industry, and they might be able to tax ADW, or they have different tools at their disposal. If it goes down to the racetrack, it has to be essentially, horsemen and racetracks. So going back to that question, is we really have 2 stakeholder groups that are paying entirely for, essentially HISA's operations. And one, I don't actually think that's fair in the long term, and I also don't think it's sustainable. Okay, there's a lot of people in horse racing that benefit from HISA, and I generally believe that we are contributing towards the economic growth that we're seeing, and that we'll be able to do that more and more as we kind of professionalize and get sort of become better and better at what we do. I'm so sorry, I forgot your question.
Just the difference in the 48 to 80 million, and then how that.
So if we're charging the racetrack at the commission, we charge them based on the submitted budget on a 1/12 every month. Okay, is when we expect their invoice to pay. At the end of the year, we do what's called a true up. Okay. And so based on, what they paid, what their starts were, 'cause we have to also make assumptions about starts and purses, right? And that also changes. So based on all of that, there is a true up process, which more likely than not is going to end up in them getting money back because we're coming in under budget. So even if they're not specifically in a budget situation, they're likely going to get a benefit from the overall. Now, once in a while, there's a couple of outliers where purses went up so significantly that they don't get a benefit. We have to pay into it. But typically, it's more likely they're going to get a refund. And what we do is we put that refund against their next year's obligations. So let's say, let's say Keeneland owes $3 million for 2026, but they're actually getting a $300,000 credit in 2025. then they're going to only owe 2.7. And then we'll do the 2.7 by 12ths. If that makes sense.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
So Lisa, you're gonna have to explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old, okay? Because the audience is a lot smarter than I am. So just answer this question so I can understand it. So you mentioned credits a couple of times.
Yes.
Okay. You said the budget's 80 million, but it's really, in essence, 40 something million dollars because of the credits.
Yes.
How are the credits? What are the credits and how are they earned to offset the $80 million budget?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, some of that is just our failure to spend to the limit. If you go back to my concept around, it's more of a credit line than actually a budget. But then the credits actually come from a couple of different areas. So what we try to do is we try to realize efficiencies with the states. Okay. So we try to enter into voluntary agreements with the states whereby we'll say to them, okay, you have this veterinarian that works on your racetrack full time. Okay. We need someone to do X and Y in the test barn. If you give us 20% of that employee's time, we'll credit you 20% of their annual salary towards your obligation. So basically what we're saying is, if you make us hire an entirely new person to do this job, it's going to be more expensive, obviously, right? But if we use your existing staff and we kind of rejig responsibilities, really it shouldn't be that different because they had to do it as commissions before HISA. It's not like anti-doping and testing is a brand new concept. Like it's been in effect since for a very long time. Obviously different systems, different approaches, but they had to have the staffing. So what we say is, let's work together so that you have one staff member, doing a number of things, and then you get the benefit. So we do that on testing personnel, we do that on vets, we do that on investigators. We do that really also with laboratories. Like there are some laboratories in certain states that will do research for us, and we'll give a credit for the research. We also obviously credit on if they're going to some laboratories are willing to negotiate like a flat fee, which is beneficial to HISA. And so we will then sort of credit that state back for any fees like pay or any tests that are delivered in other states. So there are a number of different ways. Those are really the keys. And it mostly ends up being like a credit from personnel, from staff, sharing staff, basically. Because we don't want to have to, there are some states that really don't like HISA, and so they just want to make it as painful as possible. And so they make us hire new people, and then they complain when it's more expensive. But if we worked collaboratively, it wouldn't be as expensive, But and we have certain constraints and obligations that did not necessarily exist under state law in every given state, right? We've got to deliver. Like one of the things, for example, people don't realize is that the act requires us to have every single covered person and covered horse registered with HISA, okay? So we had to build a portal and a system that takes in all this information and that works effectively and efficiently. And we had to have, a help desk to help trainers sort of manage that system and that transition. We have technology teams, and actually our technology teams are based in like India and the Philippines and Ukraine. First of all, the quality is great, but also for cost reasons. They're managed out of, I want a few people out of North America, but really the bulk of the teams that are programming and coding and creating all of our apps and all of our data are based internationally so that we can take advantage of cost savings. We don't have, we have a very small office. For 2 years, we were able to, the NTRA donated office space to us, so we didn't pay anything for office space. The Federal Trade Commission unfortunately came in and said they didn't like that arrangement and they wanted us to be in our own space. So we have a very small space in Lexington where about 5 people go in, but most of my staff is sort of working from home, and so we don't have those expenses in terms of, everyone has their own sort of virtual home office. And when we get together, we have the office in Lexington, but it's not large. That's just sort of like one example. But there are many ways. The other thing that I think is important for people to realize is that we're also not at scale. So as you know, we've had all of these different litigations. And with these litigations, we've ended up in a position where 3 like pretty significant states in horse racing are not under HISA's umbrella.
Right.
Talking about West Virginia, Louisiana, and Texas. Okay. At the end of the day, once the Supreme Court rules, we're either all going to be in or we're all going to be out. So we're either all out and then HISA, none of this matters, and we can stop having podcasts about HISA's budget.
No more. No, stop it. You can't stop podcast.
Or like we're all in, and West Virginia and Louisiana have so many starts that their contribution to fixed costs reduces the overall cost for every stakeholder pretty meaningfully. And so that's something people also don't realize. I mean, that's especially because we're moving to a pure starts methodology next year in 2026. And so, West Virginia and Louisiana are going to be like even more important under that methodology in terms of balancing costs. And I guess one other thing I wanted to just share, because people don't necessarily realize, is that one of the first decisions that I was faced with when I took over as CEO of HISA was the act required us to appoint an anti-doping agency to essentially run the day-to-day operations of the anti-doping program, which you all now know is HIWU. But at the time, the front runner for that position was the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. And one of the main reasons why I rejected that, and I took quite a bit of heat for it at the time, is that they were insisting on spending about double what we currently spend. So people think it's expensive now. If we had gone with USADA, it would essentially have been double. The amount of testing they wanted to do, the amount of staff they wanted, it just made absolutely no sense. HISA is more expensive than the aggregate of the commissions prior to HISA. But again, I think it's like a 15 to 20% increment. But I genuinely believe that we're delivering a lot more value, and that, in a number of states, they were barely testing. $70 a test and maybe testing for 2 or 3 things. Just because substances are prohibited doesn't mean that the commission was paying the laboratory in a contract to actually pay for them, pay to test them. You know what I'm saying in terms of the difference? It's one thing to say, these 100 substances are prohibited. It's another thing to actually legitimately test for them.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Just Joe, if I just do a quick follow up. So one of the listeners sent us a question saying, "Hey, the 2 biggest line items on the HISA budget are for HIWU $37 million and for lab testing $19.5 million." They're rounding a little bit. Is there any wiggle room in those numbers where you'd expect to see a decrease, or is it? And also, how is the HIWU $37 million broken out, because it's not shown on the budget?
So we we pay all of HISA's costs to operate. So that $37 million is for their entire staff, all their operations, basically everything. They're as big as HISA, so it's running like an entirely separate company. They're based in Kansas City, so salaries and office space and everything are really, kind of very manageable. They're not what they would be, obviously, in New York or a major city or even Lexington. So we do save significant costs there, and there are also people some of whom are based remotely. But really, the HIWU line item is for all of their operations, all of their salaries, and we do constantly, Ben Mosier, who runs that, he does a very good job with the budget, and he's consistently under budget. Again, going back to kind of the credit line concept. And also, we're always talking about ways that we can increase efficiencies. We're learning to some extent, how to operate this as we're building the plane. People always say to me, like, why didn't you wait a couple of years and launch when you were ready? Because we weren't given that choice. I would have been first in line to be like, give me 2 years to build this.
Right.
Congress gave us a deadline. Like we had, sometimes I think the interest understand that when Congress got involved, like that is the federal government. We are not the federal government, but we answer to them. And there's a lot of things that I and my staff do behind the scenes to basically keep the attackers away, so to speak. So
keep them at bay.
Do its thing, keep them at bay. That people don't see. I have to answer to Congress all the time. Individual Congress people and individual senators. But if they have a constituent who's not happy about something, my phone is the one that rings. We've got to deal with all the animal welfare organizations. You may not like them and you may not think they're credible, but they still have to be dealt with. And that's what we do to try to just let the folks who are in racing just do their racing jobs, focus on racing and the best, best horses and best stories and best jockeys. So that's, and then the lab testing, yes. If you were to ask me, what do I think the biggest impact of HISA has been? I would probably say the laboratory testing. I'm horrified, honestly, at what was happening pre-HISA. I mean, I really can't put it any other way. Over the course of 2 years, we've gone from something like 8 labs to 4. And some labs that were testing an inordinate number of samples for horse racing that were, not professional, not operating properly, not operating with integrity. Now, if your labs aren't operating with integrity, you have nothing.
Right.
What's the whole point of a program if you're testing? Like, the tests just mean nothing, And so the fact that we've had, essentially 3 laboratories that have been suspended, and then we've had 1 that actually changed ownership under our watch. So that's been huge. And from a cost standpoint, as we narrow the number of labs, we can improve the economics, because as you can possibly imagine, if we're negotiating with a laboratory, if we can say to them, okay, now we're going to give you, state X's samples too, because that laboratory isn't operating, we want you to cut our prices by 10%, Right. And that has happened all the time. That has happened each year, and it's gotten better. And we'll continue to do that. And we're also talking about all the time, like, what does the data show us about our hit rates in terms of testing? And, should we test winners all the time? Do we need to test winners? The winners are typically expecting to be winners, or at least a place. And so they're typically expecting to be tested. So is that really the best use of our money? But then, if we don't test a winner and you have a horse in the race, how do you feel about that? Right. So there's, so we need a little bit more data before we can comfortably say, let's move in this direction or that direction. And it's HIBU's responsibility to come up with the testing plan. And they do that using, intelligence data. I mean, it's not, a guy with a piece of paper and a pen sitting down and say, we're going to test here and there. There's a lot of structure and data and intelligence that goes into sort of putting all that together.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, just real quick, we got a lot of questions from people, so appreciate the people chiming in. We're going to focus on the budget just for the purposes of this conversation, but we've had Lisa on before. We're going to have her back in the future, and we can talk more specifically about the ADMC program. So don't think that we ignored your questions. We're just focusing on the budget for this interview. One of the things I think that's kind of lost in the discussion about the expenses of HISA was like the opportunity cost of running against cheaters.
Right.
And looking at the form and looking at the condition book and the entries, and knowing immediately if you see a certain name on that page, you're running for second. Or if they have multiple horses, maybe you're running for third. I'm curious about the back and forth that you've had with horsemen. Like, do they acknowledge that to you? Obviously the cost thing is a concern, and I understand that, but do they acknowledge kind of the opportunity cost of not having to run against cheaters anymore?
So, it's really interesting. It probably is not going to surprise you to say that I hear privately from a lot of trainers who are preaching that, and a lot of owners. And it tends to be the ones who are at the top of, really top of the sport. Unfortunately, to some extent, they're not public about it the way our critics are. So you hear a lot more kind of noise in the Twitter X world, obviously, than you hear positive. But I don't think that's necessarily reflective of the sentiment. Mm-hmm. And I had a number of people who contacted me to say that while there's obviously several factors that resulted in the sale being so successful, some of which are obviously the appreciation, depreciation, and the stock market. But everybody said to me, like, we truly believe that HISA plays a role also, because we're not going to be bringing in like new buyers and new entrants to the industry if they don't think they're coming into like a fair sport and a level sport, and a sport that has a strong regulatory structure. And if you look at, there's a couple of people that I think are really sort of worth pointing out, like Griffin Johnson, who's really done a lot, I believe, for the industry. He answers to a demographic that is young and very socially conscious. And he said to me a number of times, like, I could never be involved in horse racing if HISA didn't exist, because I wouldn't be able to tell my followers that this is really about an industry that cares a lot about horses, not just me personally, but an industry that cares about horses. Same with, we have, a consortium now with Little Yachty and a couple of other rappers, and same thing, their manager, Adam, came to us and said, we want to partner with HISA. We want to be able to do things with HISA. And we explained we're a regulatory body, we don't partner, but we're really happy, that you feel comfortable coming into the industry because of the regulatory framework. And, I get told all the time, trainers are leaving and purses are down and race days are down. It's just like not factually correct.
No.
I mean, every time an owner comes into the program, they have to register with HISA. And if they leave, they have to retire. And the numbers are just going up in terms of owners and trainers. They're not going down. And, purses in most jurisdictions are going up. Like, I even know you're asking me about the letter from the THA. I mean, it's a little humorous for me to look at that letter when you see, NIFA and KTA complaining about the cost of HISA, when purses have gone up at a level that is so much higher than HISA costs. And also where you see like construction, like the Belmont, you see a ton of money being put into, Churchill Downs and Keeneland, and you see, Maryland with all of it. So you see growth in the industry. You're not seeing contraction. And where you are seeing contraction, as I do believe that some contraction is probably necessary in our industry to maintain top sport and to maintain welfare. If you look at the full crop and you take into account that we don't have any horses that we did, 20, 30 years ago, whatever it was, we can't have more racing than our horses can tolerate.
Right.
From a welfare standpoint, we don't have enough horses to have a tremendous amount of racing, and so there are some places where they may pull back on certain race dates, but the purse levels are still going to be the purse levels. Will just be given out over a smaller number of dates. We haven't seen that happen yet, but I do think with this new methodology coming next year, it may, where starts are the only factor. But what I hope it does is it encourages kind of smart planning, so that you have within a state, coordination between racetracks about when to race. That just makes no sense to me, right? Like in Pennsylvania, they're on top of come up with a calendar that makes sense for everyone. It's a win-win. And hopefully when they look at the costs under the pure starts methodology, they'll take all those factors into consideration and find a program that maximizes, the product, right? The quality of the product, and also prioritizes horse welfare.
Yep. And Lisa, I know that you have people that tell you behind the scenes, that they're pleased with HISA, they're pleased with the results, they're pleased with your leadership. And Joe and I say it openly. When you have West Point Thoroughbreds and DJ Stable, arguably two of the top 20 racing operations in the country, that on a week in and week out basis, are promoting and standing by everything that's HISA, because, number one, we learned what the rules were like beforehand, the Wild West, and what that racing was like. But now through whether it's, it could be any combination of all of these, whether it's, HISA's unified rules and regulations, the tax depreciation schedule, the strong structure, within the industry, the social license renewal, as you mentioned, getting marketing initiatives, through the next generation. All those things are kind of lining up and building our sport to be recognized and to be accepted again in the general practice of the world, which is great. And it leads me to the question of like, what price for fairness? Like, is a 20% increase in expenses worth, knowing that the races are run with integrity and that you have a fair chance to win the race? Everyone's got to look in the mirror and ask that question to themselves as to whether or not, it's the expenses are worth it. When I look at a budget, I'm shifting gears now, but when I look at a budget, I'm looking at two sides of it. One is the expense side and the other side is the revenue side. Mm-hmm. And there is, projected $1.4 million of revenue on the 2026 budget. Can you explain to the audience, why HISA would be making money or earning revenue? And are there other outlets in the future that you see where that number is going to grow and therefore would decrease the amount of expense?
So I'm so happy you asked that question, because that was something that I really wanted to have the opportunity to talk about. So HISA has recently announced its financial goals for the next 10 years. And we've set really two key objectives. One is that by 2030, half of the budget will be generated by revenues outside of assessments. And by 2035, we'll be budget neutral. There'll be no assessments. And the way that I'm spending the majority of my time on revenue producing initiatives, as well as potential government partnerships that might allow us to bring in other revenue. That to me is where the focus should be. So instead of saying, let's make HISA a subpar product, let's kind of cut costs so we're just kind of like no better off than we were before HISA, versus I agree 1,000% that it's too much long term for horsemen and racetracks. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's sustainable. It's not my plan. But I have to go that way out of the gate because I had no other options. So we are working on a number of different initiatives that involve, essentially packaging some of our data that's anonymized and selling it through various products. We have about 5 or 6 different apps that we've created to help our horsemen essentially comply with HISA, organize data, et cetera. We have a lot of stuff that we do for the vets, and some of that has gotten attention overseas, where there's been some interest in purchasing some of our technology to use in other jurisdictions. We have a few different government programs that we're working on. We have a number of different, I don't want to start getting into the details of the different products, but we are spending a lot of time, and that's my main focus, is finding money. Because what I'd much rather do is bring money in so we can grow, but at the same time, significantly lessen the burden on the industry, especially the folks in the industry who are working, I think, the hardest to make ends meet, which is really the trainers, the horsemen, and the racetracks.
No doubt. I have one more question.
I just want to add.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I want to just add about why the future looks a lot better than the present. Is that there are certain expenses that we had to make up front around technology to just create and build that are going to lessen over time, that are going to decrease and will result in cost savings. We've spent about $12 million on litigation costs. I'm very much hoping that when this whole
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, we spent so much money on litigation costs, and you can't even imagine the number of lawsuits that have been filed against us. And just to make clear, there was a lot of criticism around the Serpy case, but that decision was based on very simple math. It was going to cost us about $400,000 to litigate the case, and it was a $20,000 fine. So I wasn't going to spend $400,000 to litigate the case for $25,000 of the industry's money, when my understanding from my legal team was the best case scenario for him would be that the fine would be removed. So like you said, okay, we're not going to, we've got to make good. A lot of what we have to do is just make good decisions about how we spend money. And so I think you all know me well enough to know the intention is never to deprive anybody of their right to be heard or their opportunity to bring their case and to do whatever they want. But I have a fiduciary duty to manage money responsibly. And, that's what we're constantly trying to do. And then when those additional states come in, all of those factors together are going to really help bring down the burden on individual horsemen and racetracks.
John, it's all you. That was going to be my question. I know you say a lot of stuff comes in under the budget. I know one factor, one facet of the budget that's not coming in under budget
every year.
Yeah, so
we're way too optimistic when we set those numbers.
I know. So that's what I said last week on the show, was like, listen, if you have concerns or questions about the budget, I totally respect that. But can you get some of your friends to drop some of these frivolous lawsuits? I think you might have a little bit more of a leg to stand on. That's my feeling anyway. John, Take us home.
No, one of my two questions had to do with the legal amount that's on the amount for potential legal fees. Are the two big cases, I would consider the two big cases to be the Churchill Downs suit and also the national suit, are they any closer to being settled? Do you want to settle them, or is it we're just going to go ahead and go through the process through the courts?
So I would love to settle them. I mean, I think it's a win-win for everyone if we could sit down with horsemen and determine, what are their priorities and what can we do for them that is consistent with, our goals and our objectives. I mean, I genuinely believe that every horseman, for the most part, there may be a couple of outliers, but 99.9% of horsemen want the same things we do. They want a safe sport, a prosperous sport, a fair sport. And I really believe sitting down and having conversations, we can get there. My understanding is that the HEPA feels very strongly they need to see what the outcome of the litigation is before they can actually have conversations. But if that were able to change, I'd be the first one, standing in line, hoping to have those conversations, because I think we have a lot more in common than we have differences. And I know we all want the same thing. And it just seems really silly. I used to be a lawyer myself, so I don't have anything against lawyers, but we really, instead of, paying lawyers, we should be saving that money for the industry and working together to kind of figure out what really needs to happen and what the best system is. And I'm very open to discussing with horsemen and taking on board suggestions and really finding compromises. That's really how I try to operate. I think it's the only way to be successful. And so I do very much hope that we do come to a point where we can all, sit down and have a conversation and reach a resolution that's best for everyone.
All right, good. Because we know a lot of people from the national organization watch the show. So what you're saying is, Eric Hamelbeck, call Lisa. Give Lisa a call, because it sounds like that there's more things that we agree on. Absolutely.
For the industry.
Absolutely.
I have a lot of respect for Eric.
Yep.
I have no issue with Eric. He has a job to do. I have a job to do. But if at some point his constituents want to empower him to sit down and have a conversation, I'll be very, very, very happy to do that.
Right.
One other thing I just wanted to take a minute on, if you guys don't mind, is I just wanted to kind of go through very quickly some of the different areas where HISA is involved in delivering value, because I think the perception is that it's just the anti-doping program. That's kind of like all we do. And it is a small portion. It's the most expensive portion, but it's a small portion of what we do. As I mentioned earlier, we built an IT system and portal that is highly sophisticated, that runs, something called HISA Check, which is a risk assessment system that runs every race card every day at every track that HISA operates in. And we deliver that information to the regulatory veterinarians to help them with their pre-race exams and to empower them with essentially the historical notes on the horse and to be aware of which horses they need to sort of focus on. We have HISA Horse Insight, which is every horse. We have a graph that essentially charts every single thing that's happened to that horse in the last 6 months, year, whatever time frame you want to look at. We get several thousand records a day. We were probably up at around 6 million records now. So we're always analyzing that data and giving it back to the industry. We've made advancements on exercise-associated sudden death. We've made advancements on, shoulder fractures. Everything that we can learn from the data, we're trying to give back to the industry. We have a public affairs team that works in DC to try to keep, working along the NTRA, but also trying to make sure that everybody is satisfied that we are doing the best for horse welfare and that racing is deserving of protection and deserving of longevity. We have 3 veterinarians that work for us who spend all their time, interacting with veterinarians at different racetracks on the ground, making suggestions. I have one veterinarian who works for me, Dr. Karen Hassan, who went to Thistledown 10 times to try to help them, sort of improve their operations. And they've made a tremendously large improvement. My vets have spent a ton of time at Turf Paradise. Turf Paradise went from a horrible, fatality record to no fatalities in the last quarter. So, we have lots of people who work on the ground. We're working very hard every day. I've got a legal team of only one person who, is dealing with, of course, we have some outside counsel, but is dealing all the time with all of these issues. And it's better to have somebody internal and more cost effective. We spend a lot of time on jockey welfare. The act also requires us to protect jockeys. And we spend a lot of time on their physical welfare, their mental welfare, We have Jeff Johnson, who works for us, who used to work for the Jockeys Guild, but is interacting all the day. We have a medical director who is now in charge of human injuries. And for example, he spent the last couple of days on the phone with Brian Hernandez's team and Brian Hernandez's wife, making sure he's getting the best care possible. So now what happens when Jackie gets hurt at one racetrack, all of their records go with them to whatever trauma center they're going to. And Dr. Hester is on the phone immediately within like minutes to make sure that they get the best surgeons, the best care, that everything is being prioritized. And that didn't happen before. And, you know, the Guild's been terrific with us. I mean, they would have always wanted this to happen. They didn't have the sort of leverage or the power to make it happen. But together we've been able to. So I'm not gonna keep going, but there are so many things that we're out there doing. We also do racetrack accreditations. We accredit every racetrack in the country. So all the money that used to go towards paying the NTRA to do that is now saved, right? Like that's not being paid by racetracks. We also pay for every single racetrack to have their initial start of the season evaluation from the Racetrack Services Testing Laboratory. That's another expense that used to live somewhere else, but is not a new expense. It's just that we're now taking it over because it needs to be uniform and the same across the board, and not necessarily every racetrack was doing it before. We need to make sure that every racetrack is. So there are just so many areas that HISA is working hard to make improvements and advancements in, and people shouldn't just think of it as an anti-doping agency, because it's so much more.
That's a great way to finish right there. And so much of it is being done behind the scenes too. So, you know, Lisa, I appreciate the transparency in the chat as always. Like I said, we'd love to have you back on to talk more in specifics about the ADMC program, but this was great. And I appreciate the time, and keep fighting the good fight. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Real Talk is sponsored by the Green Group, the #1 accounting firm in the horse business. No other CPA firm knows the horse industry like they do. Len and DJ have over 200 horses and a potential champion this year, and have won over 2,600 races. John, I'm trying to make John as uncomfortable as possible leading up to that Breeders' Cup. Special offer, as always, for listeners of Real Talk. You can become one of the almost 1,000 clients that the Green Group has in the racing business, in the horse business. Complimentary, confidential, half-hour consultation. If you call in at, what's that number? Michael Agresta. 732-634-5100. Or you go to greenco.com, guarantees that he will find you value. He'll donate to your favorite charity or whatever you want. He's not worried. He's found value before for all sorts of people around the industry. He knows he can do it for you as well. So you got nothing to lose. Give him a call. Go to the website. Get that consultation. And I'm pretty sure you'll end up a Green Group client, like our fearless leader at West Point Thoroughbreds, Terry Finley. Terry, tell us all about what Len and Green Group have done for you.
Always been a huge fan of Len Green. I've known him for probably 35 years. I remember when I first started, I tracked him down because he was a significant player then, and that was, 34 years ago. He took my call 34 years ago, and we spent a day at the races. He actually won a race with a horse by the name of Do It With Style, who was his first Grade 1 winner. And the interesting thing is he won a stake. At that time, it was probably Keystone, and they didn't have a crop with the jock. He's just a gem of a man. There's a sweetness to him, obviously the integrity part, and he's a person that you'd love to go to dinner with, in addition to being whip smart on all things business. And don't ever try to trip him up with a tax issue, because you ain't doing it, brother. You ain't doing it. And anyway, he's just a testament to somebody who has lived a life and continues to live a life that is well lived and with honor and integrity and joy and passion. They've been down every road you can be down in the thoroughbred horse business as owners and breeders. They've been down it, and I think ultimately that impact and that advantage really comes out in the client's favor. And that's what they really like to do. They like to own good horses, and they like to do good work on their taxes. And I think that's a very, very, it's a good and impactful combination for both a group of people that work at the Green Group and Len and John and their family on the horse ownership side.
Thank you, Terry. Very exciting times for Terry and West Point and me and John and Tailor Made. We got Ewing coming up in about a week and a half to run in the Breeders' Futurity. That's super, super exciting. Try to punch his ticket to the Breeders' Cup. On the West Point side, we also have Curtain Call running in the Champagne. So fingers crossed for both of our talented 2-year-old boys. And yeah, go check out the Green Group. You know the number by now. If you don't, it's 732-634-5100 or greenco.com. Len can help you get your tax situation organized and find you savings. He guarantees it. So despite there being no grade 1 winners in the race, it was a pretty exciting Pennsylvania Derby field, and the race shaped up pretty interesting too. You know, we figured Baeza was going to be the horse to beat. We thought he was going to get the setup with a lot of speed. That's the way it played out, but he was much the best in that race. I thought Magnitude ran a really good race to be second for a horse who had only really done his thing on the lead before. For him to be able to sit off the pace and keep closing like that and, you know, get within a couple of lengths of Baeza, I think that bodes really well for him going forward into his 4-year-old season. But it was a satisfying result for Baeza because he was the third best of what's looking like an all-time crop of 3-year-olds, at least at the top this year. And, you know, shout out to John Sheriffs and the team for, like, you know, kind of nursing him along, getting him to be a little bit better. And he had his coming out party on Saturday. He got a 105 buyer, and just, it looks like he's going to be a contender in the Classic. Like, he's going to have to step up a little bit, but it's not like he's way far behind those other 2 horses and at least the older horses as well. So I thought that was a pretty satisfying result, and, you know, a horse who had danced a lot of dances, and I think in any other year would have been a multiple grade 1 winner by now. And that's why it was so stupid that the idea that because there wasn't a grade 1 winner in the race, it wasn't a good race when the 2 top 3-year-olds have won all the grade 1s pretty much this year. You had Gosger, who was second in the Preakness, second in the Haskell. You had Baeza. You had a bunch of other really nice horses. So it was a great race on paper. It turned into a great race on the track. John, any thoughts?
Well, I think there's 2 takeaways. One is that, you know, like you said, that there's a big 3 now in the crop between journalism, sovereignty, and Baeza. And it's not just Baeza being there because he was the little brother of 2 other grade 1 Triple Crown winner, you know, horses. Now he is, you know, legitimately a grade 1. And Joe, don't forget, going into that race, he was probably the best A other than in the country. I mean, he only won 1 race going into that race. So it just goes to show you the depth of talent, at least at the top end of this 3-year-old group. So I think that was super important. I think that now he's no longer the little brother of, now he's stamped himself as a legitimate horse himself. And, you know, really, I think he moved earlier than anticipated at the 3/4 mark. He was rolling. I mean, they were going 110-2, and that's when he started making his move into the teeth of the speed, and really made a huge run down the lane. Earned a 105 buyer, which again shows that incrementally he's improving, at least on the buyer numbers. You know, every time he runs, this being his 8th race of his career, and now he is, you know, at least should be talked about in the Classic with some of these other horses. I thought it was great that Magnitude came roaring home at the end. I mean, you know, if it was a 1.25 miles instead of 1.125 miles, maybe the tables would have been turned as far as that goes. But to me, it was, you know, the horses that were in there showed up. I think that that's not always the case in, you know, as we're getting close to October of these horses when they've campaigned so hard the way they have throughout their 3-year-old year. And it's just setting up, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's setting up to be a really cool Classic in about 5 weeks or so out in California.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a stacked race. We're really looking forward to it. You got Fierceness, Sierra Leone, Baeza, Sovereignty, Journalism, obviously, Mind Frame, Antiquarian. I'm probably forgetting somebody, but that contention is going to go like 8 or 9 deep in that race. And
don't forget about Altabelli.
Who's Altabelli?
That was the $15,000 claimer that ran for the first half of the race in the PA Derby.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be the centerpiece of the Breeders' Cup card, and it isn't always. It's a little bit of an afterthought sometimes, but this year I think it will be that main event. So we're really looking forward to that. And the Cotillion Clico got it done for Brennan Walsh and Irad Ortiz. an improving 3-year-old filly. And it's funny to me, like how much the division race in the 3-year-old filly division has changed just in like a couple of months. Like going into the Acorn on Belmont weekend, Good Cheer was like 3-5 to be 3-year-old champion at that point. And now I don't think she has any shot at all unless she like somehow jumps up and wins the distaff. She has fallen off a cliff in the second half of the year so far. And it obviously bodes well for Nitrogen. This is the Jon Green show, so we have to mention that angle. She's obviously got a tall task against Torpedo Anna coming up in the Spinster. So we'll see, but this is now a wide open division. When it didn't really seem that way through May, there was one filly that was kicking everybody's ass. Now who knows?
And I think Good Cheer is a situation where she was so dominant early on in her career and really never took that next step. I mean, she peaked, at the end of her 2-year-old, beginning of her 3-year-old year, and I think has hit that ceiling where like a 91, which is a really good buyer number for a 3-year-old filly. She's hit that 91 mark now on 3 out of her past 4 races, and just can't get to that next level, or like everybody else is moving up and developing. So it's no disparagement, I think, to Good Cheer's resume, but she's just not as good anymore. I mean, she was a phenomenal 2-year-old. She was a phenomenal early 3-year-old. And like you said, she was, 1-5 in the Acorn. And ran, very poorly, ran 5th at a 6 in there. But let's focus on the winner, who, again, this is only her 5th race of her career. A quality road filly that should, have blue sky ahead of her as far as improvement. She improved to from an 83 buyer winning the Indiana Oaks to a 92 buyer, got the grade 1. And Dry Powder, I thought, also put in a huge run on the outside, a gun runner out of a Broken Vow mare that ran second. And then they were just kind of picking up the pieces after that. I was a little disappointed in Scottish Lassie. I thought for sure that from the rail that she was going to be able to break and go, and maybe she bounced off of a 99 buyer, which is an eye-opening buyer number and an eye-opening race in the CCA Oaks that she won at Saratoga. And Joe, just like we said last week, to this date, Lucara still hasn't passed a horse.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, she's a one-way speed, and she caught the right track in the Acorn and took advantage of it, but just hasn't been able to make that same impact since. I don't agree with the idea that Scotch Lassie bounced, because didn't they skip the Alabama specifically to avoid her regressing off of the CCA Oaks? I think maybe she's just one of those horses that can pop up and run a big race every once in a while, but just can't string them together consistently. So it's a really interesting division race now, coming down to the last 6 weeks or so leading up to the Breeders' Cup. And obviously we're on Team Rail Talk are rooting for Nitrogen, but it makes it more. What? It's that face.
No, I banged.
You don't want me to mention her name too much?
I banged the computer while I was trying to get.
Okay.
I was trying to get my Nitrogen hat. No. I wasn't like poo. Stop saying that. Stop saying that. No. I'm all Team Nitrogen. Yeah. No. She's. Yeah. We're. I mean, the whole point of the exercise is trying to get her to be Eclipse champion, and certainly running in the Spinster is going to be interesting. Joe, as of today, there was only 3 horses that had committed to running in the Spinster. It was us and 2 other older mares, Torpedo Anna and Darth Vader, is hinting that they're not sure yet. They're either going to run in the Spinster or skip it altogether and just go right up to California.
Do or do not. There is no try.
I just had that conversation with Patty this morning. That's ironic because I was the whole Mr. Miyagi. I did it with a bad accent, but you did it actually perfectly.
But that's Yoda. That's why I said it.
Oh, that's Yoda. Okay. Well, Mr. Miyagi also said, I won't do the voice, but basically he's like, Daniel-san, are you ready? And he said, I think so. And he goes, no, you ready? No ready. Think so.
I was just thinking, we're on the same track right there. I was just thinking because of the Darth Vader thing, Yoda.
You were right. Anyway. And because Baby Yoda is running again this weekend. I mean, no, you, as usual, you are the rudder of this ship.
Of this often rudderless ship.
Rudderless, sailless, meandering boat to nowhere.
But just going back to the PA Derby card for a second. So they handled $17.8 million. That's the second highest total ever. 18.8 in 2022 was the record. And we did it, John. They handled more than the purse money they gave out. That's what we were looking for. And that's what we got. And, in all seriousness, it's, Parx is not the most glamorous track in the world, but it is home for a lot of blue collar horses throughout the year. So it is nice to see them, get their moment, get their day on center stage. And, they put on a good show. Barnes was like,
absolutely. Yeah.
Barnes got beat at like 1-5 in the Gallant Bob, big upset there. There was a lot of a good mix of results. He had like the chalk and Baeza kind of breaking out and getting his time in the sun. And then you had, the up and comer like Clico and the Cotillion. You had some upsets mixed in too. So it was a really nice card, beautiful day. And shout out to the team at Parx for pulling it off. It's, it serves a real purpose, I think. And I say this as someone who doesn't like that it's cannibalized the Travers, but you kind of do need that springboard because the Woodward is no more pretty much. The Santa Anita race is obviously all the way on the West Coast. You got the Lucas Classic this weekend, but it's not like a huge marquee race. So it does serve a real purpose now in that calendar for the 3-year-olds as kind of a springboard to the Breeders' Cup. And the race just keeps getting better in quality.
Well, and I love, again, you and I are both regional track guys, and I love it when a regional track gets a day like this and they get the weather and they get the horses and they get the turnout that they so richly deserve. The other 300 and whatever days that they race during the year, they're usually not great cards. But for this day, they really showed off well. They gave away a lot of money. They got a lot of people that came to the races, and they exposed their facility to the racing industry. And there were some wonderful comments, believe it or not, on Twitter about Parx Day. And for these regional tracks, they need to have a signature day or a signature moment like this, where they give away a shit ton amount of money and they show off and they are of importance on the racing calendar. And I think you hit the nail on the head. They've stolen the thunder from New York by through the amount of money and the placement of these races. To be 5 weeks before the Breeders' Cup is absolutely perfect, because anyone who wants to race in Kentucky is going to wait to run opening weekend at Keeneland, so it's 4 weeks away, and it's just the perfect amount of time for today's modern athlete and the perfect placement on the calendar for when they can have these races. So I give them a lot of credit for kind of realizing that niche and exploiting it.
Yeah, well, and there's no real Breeders' Cup Classic prep at Keeneland even. So if you got a 3-year-old, like where else are you going to run right now to get to the Classic? And also, it broke over the weekend that the Pennsylvania Racing Commission is doing searches and seizures on the backstretch as well. Yeah. So I mean, that's something that, and we've seen that before. Like you got to give a tip of the hat to them for being proactive now. Certainly there are guys there that I think are taking an edge that they haven't busted yet. Right. But, at least I've seen some kind of effort in the past couple of years by the powers that be in Pennsylvania to try to clean things up. So I think that's another kind of good karma that they're putting out into the universe. They deserve to have a really nice card like this on a beautiful day, like you mentioned. Real Talk is sponsored by Fasig-Tipton. Fasig-Tipton got a lot of sale action coming up today. Actually, we're recording this on Tuesday morning. Today is the California Fall Yearling Sale out in Pomona, the number one source of California bred yearlings, as well as yearlings bred in other regions of North America. You can find a lot of great stallions in those pedigrees that can take advantage of the California bred program. So West Point's going to be poking around, looking for maybe a Cal bred yearling or two. That sale has been good for us in the past. September 30th, next Tuesday, is the Mid-Atlantic Fall Yearling Sale. You can check out that catalog online. After that, October 2nd through the 7th is the October Digital Sale. This is the second to last digital sale of the year. So get involved. If you want some of those turnkey horses you can put on the racetrack in a couple of weeks, this is your second to last chance of the year. There will be no digital sale in November. There will be one in December. After that, we got the Saratoga Fall Mix Sale up at Saratoga, October 14th. You can check out that catalog online. And you got the Kentucky October yearlings, October 20th through the 23rd. You know, my feeling about that sale between that and July. I think those are two of the most underrated sales to get really, really nice horses from. I mean, wasn't Torpedo Anna a $40,000 October grad?
You're exactly right, Joe.
Yeah, so you can, you know, obviously Fasig has it covered with the high end sales too, but that's a 4-day sale that's got a lot of quality in it. Horses that maybe weren't quite ready to show at the September sale go to the October sale and are able to put their best foot forward and, you know, bring some good bucks, but you can also find some value in that sale. The November sale, the Night of the Stars, is November 3rd. Cannot wait for that. You know, that's one of of all the sales of the entire year, that's one that I always make sure I'm in front of my computer watching if I'm not there, and it's just such a treat and such an honor to see those beautiful mares come in a lot of times after competing in the Breeders' Cup and sell to new buyers for millions of dollars. And I just, you know, considering the numbers we've seen at the sales this year, I can only imagine what the Night of the Stars is going to be like. So looking forward to those fireworks. And then to close out the year, there's the December 4th through 9th December digital sale. Get involved in the brick and mortar sale. Go to digital.fasig-tipton.com to learn more about that. Fasig-Tipton, your one-stop shop for anything you need: broodmares, yearlings, weanlings, horses of racing age. They got it covered. So it's been a couple of weeks, but we are here to bestow a new Rail Talk citation upon a very, very impressive 2-year-old colt who won on Friday. It was the 19th. So I guess that was Friday. Englishman won by 7 1/4 lengths at Churchill Downs, went 22-1, 44-3, 108-3, and stopped the clock in 121-1. First time out. 7 furlongs to win by that much and to go that fast. This is a son of Maxfield, who, you know, very quietly, the Maxfields have been running left and right throughout this year. And I think that's extra impressive because his horses are supposed to get better as they get older and as the distances get longer. For him to be popping with this many 2-year-olds in July, August, September, I think is very, very promising for the rest of his stallion career. It was obviously a beautiful horse, well-bred horse, being owned and bred by Godolphin. This is a horse that you have to keep an eye on, both the stallion and Englishman, who was absolutely incredible. Trained by Cherie DeVoe, owned by CRK Stable, bought for $400,000 as a Keeneland September yearling. Bill Betts, friend of the show who doesn't watch the show, consigned and sold this horse at the Keeneland September sale last year. So this is a horse you got to have on your radar. It's probably like a little too much too soon to try to make it to the Breeders' Cup. Maybe if he debuted a couple of weeks earlier, he could have gotten into one of those preps. But either way, I think there's going to be several Maxfields on the Derby Trail next year, and I think Englishman is at the top of that list. So if you haven't seen the replay, I think you can put it up on the screen. If not, you can find it easily on Twitter. Englishman is the newest Rail Talk citation. Rail Talk is sponsored by Tailor Made. Shout out to the Tailor Made team for making it through the Marathon Keeneland September sale. Number one consigner at pretty much every major yearling sale. This one is no different. They hundreds of horses, but they treat every horse like they're the most important horse in the consignment. That's hard to do with the volume that they have, but they have the team, they have the staff, they have the expertise and the knowledge to make it happen for you. That's why John uses them. That's why so many other major sellers use Tailor Made, especially at the yearling sales. And I just wanted to mention real quick about the stallion roster. Obviously not this time, has been a meteoric success for the stable and for the stallion barn, and has just, continues to get better and better and better. And I think he's a top 3 sire in America right now. Mm-hmm. I think he might be coming for that number 1 spot. I know it's a hefty competition with Gunrunner and Into Mischief, but he's got all the tailwinds that he needs to go for that general sire's title. And I think it's going to happen at some point in the next few years. I also wanted to mention West Point picked up 2 early voting colts at the September sale. And I don't know about you, John, but I thought they showed very, very well. It's obviously he's the son of Gunrunner from a really good family. You'd expect him to be a solid stallion prospect, but I was really impressed with the way they looked.
I concur, so much so that we actually bought one in book 5 because we were just so impressed with the athleticism, and we got outrun on 2 other ones that we had on our short list. So certainly from a small pool of first crop horses because he had a little bit of a fertility issue. So his numbers are going to be down. But the ones that showed up in the sale, Joe, were very impressive. And as you mentioned, they're going to the right programs, which means that they're going to have every chance possible to succeed. But I think early voting is an under the radar horse just because he doesn't have the numbers that some of these other, freshman sires have.
Well, yeah, well, it's just, like you say, it's especially impressive for him to have these kind of results with a smaller crop. And yeah, if there's any West Point partners listening, those two colts are almost sold out. So you want to jump in soon, because the early votings were very impressive. And, Tailor Made does a great job picking up those kind of mid-market stallions that maybe the other farms aren't spending buku bucks to get. They're building that stallion roster to really support Not This Time. And the early votings are definitely worth a look. And I really don't like having to keep doing segments like this, eviscerating my beloved New York racing. But this has been going, this is like every time I think that the New York stewards have found all the ways to screw up a race, they find a new way. And they found a new way on Saturday at Belmont at the Big A in the last race of the day. Now, a lot of people are like, instinctively people are like, well, Naira screwed this up and Naira screwed that up. I don't think this was Naira, guys, this time. Like, and I trust me, I've been very critical of Naira. Like, I think the race at the wrong distance thing, like, yes, the ultimate responsibility falls on the stewards,
right.
But there's 100,000 people that work at Naira that could have been like, and noticed something.
Right.
But in this case, I think this was a steward's decision. So in the last race of the day on Saturday at Belmont at the Big A, there was a horse who had drawn in off of the also eligible list, named One More Time. I think that was his name, or just One More. It doesn't matter. It was one of those names. And they were walking onto the turf course for the last race of the day. And then out of nowhere, when they're about to load into the gate, pretty much, Chris Griffin, the track announcer, comes on and says, number 13, Just One More, is going to be running for purse money only. No explanation. That was it. That was all that was said. And, full disclosure, I was live to several horses in the pick 5, and he was one of them. And the horse is basically treated as a late scratch. So I get moved to the post-time favorite, who I may or may not have wanted. Maybe I would have liked to have an alternate. But regardless of all of that, the horse went to the front. And the horse was affecting the race and ended up running second. And if you bet the exacta, obviously you get a refund, but you feel kind of screwed if you hammer at a 113 exacta and that comes in and it pays out 1-4. That's an outrageous thing to have to deal with as a horse player, on top of all of the other, inconveniences and injustices and just overall difficulty of playing the horses. Now, the explanation that was given was that on Talking Horses, the preview show earlier in the day with Andy Serling and Sarah, mistakenly, when they were going over the race, listed the 13 as a scratch. It's hilarious because if you look at the screenshot that's going around Twitter, Andy picked the horse on top.
They both picked him to finish first, second, or third. Yes.
Yes, they had the horse in the graphic, either first or third, but on like the side graphic, the horse was listed as scratched. I'm sorry. Where is that rule in the bylaws of the state gaming laws in New York, that if a horse is listed as a scratch for 2 minutes on a preview show,
right,
the horse then is basically scratched a minute before they go into the gate later that day? Like, that to me is, I'm like very rarely at a loss for words. But that is completely stupefying that they thought that was the right decision, because the purse money only thing happens sometimes because the horse is incorrectly reported as a scratch on the website and in the tote system.
Right.
And then you can't undo that always to put the horse back in the tote system. And so, yes, that's an inconvenience and a screw up too. But at least in that way, like, you're theoretically trying to protect the bettor. Well, how is this protecting the bettor? How many times were the scratches then announced and displayed, the correct scratches announced and displayed throughout the rest of that day, that didn't override it being scratched on Talking Horses for 2 minutes? Like, this was... my mind is absolutely blown that this was the decision that they made. If anything, like, take a step back before the pick 5 and make an announcement like, hey, if you were watching Talking Horses, this horse was briefly incorrectly reported as scratched. He's running. Do that before the pick 5 and the pick 6. By the way, they had a massive pick 5 and pick 6 carryover on Saturday that this affected. And my mind is blown, John, that this was a decision that they thought was A, correct, and B, appropriate to announce as the horses are about to load in the gate for the last race of the day. Yeah. Like, and it's so funny too, because if you read the NYRA statement, and I hope we can put it up on the screen. It was an absolutely, they were like being as throwing as much shade as they could possibly do, in a tweet. Here's the tweet from NYRA. Earlier today, just one more appeared as scratched during a portion of the Talking Horses broadcast. The stewards were alerted to the issue as the horses were in the paddock for race 11 and determined that just one more, my emphasis here, despite not having been scratched in the tote system at any point, would race for purse money only, with bettors receiving the post-time favorite in multi-race wagers. So that's NYRA saying, listen, this is not us. And if I had to guess whose decision it was, I don't know this for a fact. If I had to guess which steward made that decision, I think it's pretty obvious. And he has a similar name to the horse that just won the Pennsylvania Derby. So it was a big weekend for Baeza on the positive side and in the clown car side. John, I know you weren't betting this race. You didn't have as much skin in the game here as I did, but how many different ways can they screw this up and the New York stewards?
Well, it's terrible. That again, another reason for people not to bet on New York racing. But to me, it also throws out there, like, who in their right mind would say our pre-race show is so popular that is going to move the needle because we graphically said that the horse was scratched, even though our two talents who talked about the race and described the race both picked it in their top 3 selections for the race and talked about the horse in great detail about its impact on as potentially winning the race. So that's number one. Joe, the only thing I can compare it to is decades ago, we were going to claim a horse. And we looked at the program, wrote down the horse's name, wrote down all the information on the claim slip, put it in an envelope, put the race number on the claim slip, put it in the claim box. Okay. And our claim was voided. And the reason why it was voided was because the date was incorrect. But the date was actually correct. What was incorrect was in the program when they printed it, instead of the program saying, September 23rd, it said September 25th. And there is a house rule in New Jersey at the time that said that the program is the Bible, is, the holier than thou guide as far as, so even though in real world it was the 23rd, the fact that they printed it incorrectly in the program as the 25th, our claim got voided. And we searched in the rules and regulations, all through the New Jersey statutes, and it wasn't there. It was considered a quote unquote house rule. And basically a house rule is, we fucked up, so we're going to cover ourselves by saying that this is the way we do it. And I think that if push came to shove and you got to the right person, they would say, it's a house rule that we do it this way because we're trying to protect the bettor.
In which way? But in what way does this protect the bettor?
I'm not arguing that.
If you're a bettor and you seriously handicapped this card, you looked at the scratches. In what universe is a bettor going to have looked at all of that and then saw on a graphic for a minute and a half in the morning that the horse was scratched and then not double check when like you said, the talent is picking the horse on the same screen in the same graphic package? Like, in what way does that protect the bettor?
Because when you go online and you bet, that the 13 was available, right?
Right. So the bets went through. It's not as if he was scratched at some point and the bets didn't go through. He was never, ever scratched, as the NYRA statement very, very cattily suggested. It was not their decision to do this. And that can't be a rule that's on the books. No. And I just wonder, how broad does this go? if Andy Serling is on Twitter and someone asks him about a horse and he, replies, doesn't even tweet to everybody, replies to one person like so-and-so is scratch, but he's incorrect.
Right.
So then we scratch the horse later in the day because one of the talents on Twitter replied to somebody and was incorrect for a second that the horse was scratched. Like, how wide does this go? If Andy or Sarah or Maggie have a conversation with a person in the paddock and they mistakenly tell them the horse is scratched, does somebody call the stewards and say, "Hey, I heard the horse is scratched. You gotta do something about this. Purse money only." Again, like I'm at a loss for words. It just seems like if I didn't know any better, maybe I don't. It seems like they're making up new ways to be able to screw up these races as time goes on. And we already did the one where we ran the race at the wrong distance. We did that twice, actually. We did the
once
one
for good measure.
just to make sure they got it, like how little we care about the bettors. Let's do it again. They did the one where they juxtaposed the gates and had the horses break out of the wrong gates.
Right.
It just
and now they've pseudo scratched a horse. Because
it's stunning to me. And I told Patty in the group chat, I was like, thankfully I still hit the pick 5, but if that horse had won and then another horse that I didn't have had run second, I would have legit turned into the Joker. Like it would have been one of the last straws for me betting this game. And it's, in all seriousness, like I'm so tired of the slaps in the face to the horse players. I'm just so sick of the incompetence and the disregard of the bettors, even when theoretically they're trying to, in this case, their argument would be we're trying to protect the bettors, but it just, for anybody who has a modicum of knowledge about, the way the tote system works in relative to scratches and relative to talking horses, like it's unfathomable to me that they thought that was a correct decision rather than just making an announcement and being like, "Hey, if you watch Talking Horses, you saw this horse scratch for a second, he's running."
Joe, would this constitute as a bee in your bonnet?
Oh my God, it's beyond that. This is a hornet's nest. This is resting in my brain. I can't explain it, John, how this stuff keeps happening. All right. Yep. I've said enough. I'll take down the sign after this.
Take down the sign and take down the bee in the bonnet, comment as well, because it was very well said. Joe, I also have something that is irking me, not quite to the point of a bee in the bonnet, but Mattress Mack, the beloved Jim McIngvale, who owned and campaigned Run Happy. And I hear his voice in the back of my head whenever I see a Run Happy horse Run Happy at Claiborne Farm. It's great. It's iconic. And the guy as an individual is a humanitarian and does the right thing and certainly absolutely has, above board, done work for his community and for human society. However,
he's a hero in Houston. He's a hero,
and as well he should. Makes big flamboyant bets and helps the community and rightfully so. But he burned some bridges and went out scorched earth out of our industry the other day by announcing that he was going to basically get out of the business. Even though I don't remember the last time he bought a horse, but be that as it may, he is pulling the plug and leaving the game entirely. And this is I'm reading from the Blood Horse, who were the first to report the story. Here's a quote: "We couldn't compete with all the drugs and all the injections when we were running on just hay, oats, and water," he said. "It was an uphill battle. Run Happy climbed that hill, but the rest of them couldn't. I'm not going to do damage to my integrity by drugging them and injecting them. I do right by the horses, and what was right for the horses didn't allow us to win anymore. It was time to get out." Absolutely, this sport has an integrity problem. Okay, now, I think that if Mattress Mack had said that 5 years ago, you and I would both be nodding heads and be like, yep, he's absolutely 1,000% correct. But I think that Mattress Mack, because he hasn't been active in the business the past few years, is not seeing the change in the tide as far as what's going on and making this a better sport. And yes, the tax code changes made a big difference in people coming into the sport. But you know what else did? All the positive things that we've been talking about the past few weeks in no particular order, whether it be HISA, whether it be horses not rebreaking, whether it's horses not breaking down on a national scale, whether it's, you're getting additional eyeballs on the sport because of influencers and because of targeted marketing campaigns by the industry and by segments of the industry. All those things, I think, are making the industry better. And to the point where it's no longer a who's the best chemist, it's who's the best trainer for the most part. Okay. Yeah. So I think if he raised a white flag and said, I'm not doing this anymore because I can't compete, and it was 5 or 10 years ago, absolutely positively, you get no argument from me whatsoever. But you can't say, I don't think you can say in today's day and age that it's a situation where I'm running my horses on, oats, hay, and water, and everyone else is using all of these medications, and therefore chemically they're enhanced and they're going to beat my horses. I don't think that's fair. I really don't. The other thing is, you can't sit here on a soapbox and say, I'm going to do what's right for my horses and I'm going to do what's right for the industry, and then send your signature horse to South Korea. I don't think it's fair. I don't think you can do both. You don't need the money, I don't think. So if it's a matter of that, let the horse, live its career out in Kentucky, and don't make him a stallion, because quite frankly, nobody was breeding to him anyway. So it's not a matter of like, oh, I'm going to be missing out on all this money that I could be making with him as a stallion. At this point in time, if you really love the horse and you really want to do what's right for him, again, it's not my money, it's not my horse, but I would, rather than for pennies on the dollar, I'm assuming, sell or lease him to a farm out in South Korea, just let him live his life out in Kentucky or in your beloved Texas, if that's what you want to do. So I think he was just, he's out of touch with the industry, and he was going scorched earth on his way out. And I don't think, A, he didn't need to, and B, even if he wanted to do it, it wasn't the right sentiment and wasn't the right, comments to make, because then it's simply not true anymore.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said, John. And, going back to Mac as a humanitarian, as a philanthropist, he's done great work, especially in his hometown of Houston. Every time there's a hurricane or something, he steps up. I think where a lot of government agencies fall down, and, he's revered in Texas and in Houston, and with good reason. I also think he overall has been good for the game. He brings a lot of attention to it, with his big bets and, his marketing campaigns. But I totally agree that it can't be the reason now that you're getting out of the game is that the cheaters are running rampant. It's just not true anymore. And again, that's not to say that there aren't still guys that we have to catch. There 100% are. But to say like now, as opposed to 5 years ago, that you can't compete with the cheating trainers, I think that kind of defies logic. I don't know why he's doing this. Like, honestly, he gave a couple of reasons, and I'm with him on the CAW thing. He mentioned the CAW bettors and how that's screwing up the odds for the regular bettors. I'm 1,000% with him on that, but it doesn't have anything to do with him owning horses. So I don't know why that would be a reason for you to stop owning horses. I think if I had to guess, he made a big bet on Run Happy as a stallion. Over the years, putting tons of marketing dollars into that campaign. Remember, he was sponsoring all these races where if a Run Happy horse wins the race, you get an extra bonus from Mac. And it seems like he put he even says it. He there's a quote in the TDN article that like he put all of his eggs in one basket. And he was like, and if he became Stormcat, I would have been a genius. And He wasn't. Right. So that to me seems like more of a reason that, he had this great horse and he was like, this is my chance to make a stallion, and it didn't work out. To me, that's like that to me makes more sense than I'm tired of all the cheaters in 2025. And I totally agree with you, John, on sending him to South Korea. Like, you can't in one breath say, I care so much about my horses and the integrity and making sure they're safe and all this and that, and then ship the horse all the way across the world to a country. And I don't want to cast aspersions on the whole country and all the breeding farms out there, but to a country that historically has a pretty bad reputation for how they treat their stallions. And even if you didn't want to retire him from stud duty, maybe there would have been like a regional state, like a Maryland or New York or Texas or New Mexico, one of these states maybe that, has to go a little bit bargain hunting for their stallions, for their state bred program. Maybe they would have taken a shot on Run Happy. Just because he couldn't compete in Kentucky doesn't mean he couldn't have had, a competitive crop or two in a smaller state. So there were just other options here than just, pulling the plug and sending the horse all the way across the world to South Korea. So I think Mac has been good for the game overall. This is a sad way to go out. I think if he is truly done with the business, is complaining about stuff that isn't as big of a problem as it used to be, sending your best horse all the way to South Korea and then, throwing up the double birds and walking away from the business. I don't know. It's not a great look for me for a guy who otherwise has done a lot of good things, I think, for the sport. All right, so we had some late breaking news here that we want to get into the show. John just read it to me. Go ahead, John. Tell the audience what happened.
This is literally breaking news. Breaking news. For those of you under 50 years old, you don't know what I'm doing, but that's the teletape going. Statement from the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority, a.k.a. HISA. The Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority today announced that jockey Paco Lopez has been suspended for 6 months, effective today, September 23rd, 2025. The suspension stems from Mr. Lopez's violation of the terms of his conditional reinstatement related to a December 4th incident involving Mr. Lopez's use of the riding crop on a covered horse.
December 4th?
It says December 4th, 2024 incident involving Mr. Lopez's use of a riding crop on a covered horse, national law.
Wait, that's what we knew. We knew that.
I'm just telling you, this is what
that was. What the horse where he smacked in the face. I thought
they gave him another 6 months, I guess, from it.
All right, I have to ask Lisa about that because I thought that suspension that he got like 60 days for that, and he was on parole or probation.
Right? Was it?
And he violated the terms of his probation. That's the horse, national law. Okay. Yeah. So I remember every time I see him in the PPs now, I'm like, oh, that's the horse that Paco smacked in the face for no reason.
There we go. Well, let me finish. HISA remains committed to upholding the highest standards of safety, integrity, and horse racing. We take any behavior that undermines the trust of participants and fans with the utmost seriousness. My parenthetic, except when it refers to New York. By enforcing rules consistently, we aim to promote fairness in the adjudication process, protect both horses and riders, and preserve confidence in the integrity of the sport.
6 months.
6 months.
It's pretty hefty.
Today.
It's pretty hefty. I got to get more clarification on that. It has to be something beyond just the national law thing because that was almost 10 months ago at this point, and they had already ruled on that, I thought. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. Like Paco is a repeat offender. He's a dangerous rider, and he's gotten a lot of slaps on the wrist over the years. So yeah, that's interesting, John.
It is, especially because he did win. I don't remember ever seeing this. He did win not one but two riding titles, at the same time. He won the Colonial Downs leading rider and Monmouth Park leading rider, which, again, I say a lot of things about Paco, but it's a credit to his work ethic that he was willing to do that and win races everywhere. But, at the end of the day, like the press release said, it comes down to doing the right things by the athletes and keeping the highest integrity of the sport, first and foremost.
All right, so that's going to do it for episode 106 of Rail Talk. Thank you to Lisa Lazarus for stopping by and talking to us about the HISA budget. Always appreciate her transparency and her time. Thank you to my co-pilot, Jon Green. Sans glasses. Very rare to see Johnny without the glasses on. It's like Superman. It's like Clark Kent when he turns into Superman. All right, thanks, John. Thanks to our producer, Patty Wolf, our associate producers, Julia Agresta and Nathan Wilkinson. Shout out to you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit those buttons on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible. Join the family. You won't regret it. We'll love you forever. And we'll see you next week back here on Rail Talk.